Across the vast plains of South Africa, where life and death often sit side by side, a quiet-hearted American ranger stepped into a story no one would ever believe. A thin trail of blood led him to a lion trapped in brutal barbed wire, and the choice to save that animal forged a bond far beyond human understanding. But nothing could prepare him for what happened later, when a wall of wildfire closed in, and the entire pride did something no one in the world thought possible. Dawn rose quietly over the rolling hills of the Umpalozi Reserve, casting long bands of pale gold across the grasslands. Ethan Walker eased his old Land Cruiser onto the narrow dirt track, the familiar rattle of the engine blending with the soft rustle of morning wind. To him, these early hours were sacred. Before the tourists arrived, before the heat began to shimmer across the horizon, the land felt almost honest, revealing tracks, scents, and signs that would vanish under the weight of daylight. Ethan, a former U.S. Army medic turned wildlife ranger, breathed in the cool air deeply. After years of emergency work and trauma cases, he had come here seeking something gentler, something meaningful. Protecting these animals, especially the threatened African lions, had become his new purpose, a kind of healing he didn't expect. He checked his supplies methodically: field bandages, antiseptic solutions, satellite phone, and a compact medical kit he carried everywhere. His superiors teased him for being overly prepared, but Ethan had learned long ago that even seconds could mean the difference between saving a life and losing one. He noted the sightings from yesterday: elephants grazing near the river bend, a cluster of zebras migrating early, and faint reports of illegal traps found along the southern fence line. The increase in poaching activity had become alarming, driven by illicit wildlife trade and the rising black market value of lion parts. Conservation organizations and anti-poaching patrols worked tirelessly, but the criminals were always shifting tactics. Ethan knew too well that a single wire snare or barbed trap could cripple even the strongest predator. Maya Kumalo's voice crackled through the radio, warm but laced with unease. She was one of the most experienced rangers in the reserve, and one of the few who had come to trust Ethan quickly. "Ethan, you up yet? I heard something strange late last night near the Eastern Valley. Sounded like a lion, but weak, not a normal call." He lifted the radio to his mouth. "I'm close to that sector. I'll check it out. Could be an injured male or a displaced juvenile." "Be careful," Maya warned. "If it's hurt, the pride might be nearby." Ethan smiled faintly despite the seriousness. "When am I not careful?" He turned toward the valley, driving slowly as the Land Cruiser rolled over patches of gravel and dry grass. Birds lifted from the thorn trees as he passed, filling the air, with calls that echoed through the open space. The reserve, for all its beauty, held dangers as real as any battlefield. Territorial elephants, shifting wildfire lines, unexpected flash floods. Yet Ethan felt grounded here, more than he ever did back home. The simplicity of nature, raw, unpredictable, and brutally honest, brought clarity to his thoughts in ways therapy never had. As he approached the valley, a change in the air made him sit up straighter. The wind carried a faint metallic scent, sharp and unmistakable. Blood. He slowed to a crawl, letting the engine idle as he scanned the ground. At first, nothing seemed out of place, but then he noticed a patch of grass pressed flat. Then another, a small smear of darkened red on a rock. Not much, but enough to tell him something had struggled here recently. Ethan stepped out quietly, boots touching the earth with practiced softness. The morning light revealed more signs: a short drag mark in the sand, broken stalks of tall grass bent unnaturally, and another faint trace of blood drying under the sun. His pulse quickened. Injured lions didn't move far, and wounded males could be especially unpredictable. They suffered in silence, but when cornered, they fought with a ferocity born of desperation. He moved forward carefully, sweeping his gaze over the hillside. The reserve looked peaceful, almost deceptively so. Golden plains rippled gently in the breeze, and the distant hum of insects filled the air. But the silence felt heavier than usual, as if the land itself were holding its breath. He kept one hand near his tranquilizer kit, not to harm, but to protect himself if the animal lashed out. As a ranger, his duty was conservation and safety, managing wildlife responsibly, preventing harm to both animals and visitors. It was a role requiring equal parts courage, empathy, and quick decision-making, especially in critical rescue situations often highlighted by organizations focused on wildlife protection and sustainable tourism. A sharp, muffled sound, barely more than a strained exhale, cut through the quiet. Ethan froze. It came again, low and ragged, like a creature too weak to roar. He followed the noise deeper into the brush, stepping lightly, pulling branches aside with slow, controlled movements. The air grew warmer as the sun rose, casting shifting patterns over the grass. Every instinct in him sharpened, the way they had during medical emergencies back in the service. Calm mind, steady breath, eyes on every detail. Finally, when he parted a dense clump of shrubs, his heart lurched. There, half hidden beneath a tangle of thorny vines and cruel strands of barbed wire, lay a lion, full-grown, massive, and barely breathing. Its flanks rose and fell in shallow, labored motions. The golden fur along its shoulders was matted with blood, and the metal wire dug so deeply into its flesh that Ethan felt a surge of anger at whoever had set such a trap. The lion lifted its head weakly, eyes glazed but not yet defeated. It tried to growl, but only a strained, broken rumble came out. Ethan dropped to one knee, his breath catching. "Easy," he whispered, though he knew the lion couldn't truly understand. Still, his voice softened as he spoke, a habit he had developed to soothe frightened animals and frightened people. "I'm here now. I've got you." The lion blinked slowly, its gaze unfocused, but something in its struggle spoke louder than any roar. Ethan reached for his kit with deliberate, gentle motions. His hands, steady from years of trauma care, moved instinctively, as if this was exactly where he was meant to be. And as the wind swept across the plains, carrying the scent of dust and distant acacia trees, Ethan felt the weight of a moment that would change everything, though he did not yet know how. One thing, however, was clear. This lion's story was far from over. The wind shifted as Ethan knelt beside the wounded lion, carrying the faint scent of dust and sun-warmed grass across the valley. For a moment, everything felt suspended, the quiet, the trembling breath of the great animal, even Ethan's own heartbeat. Then he caught sight of something else, a thin line of dried blood stretching beyond the bushes, leading deeper into the brush. It meant the lion had struggled hard before collapsing here, dragging the cruel barbed wire along with him. Whoever set the trap had not only broken the law, but had condemned this animal to a slow and agonizing death. The thought made Ethan's jaw tighten. Illegal poaching rings were growing bolder, driven by high-value wildlife trafficking, and the demand often highlighted in global conservation reports. But here, right now, the only thing that mattered was keeping this lion alive. He rose slowly, giving the lion space, and scanned the area. The morning sun had climbed higher, revealing more signs of distress in the earth. Grass was flattened, dirt torn up where the animal had fallen, and tried to stand again. Ethan followed the trail a few steps to understand the direction from which the lion had come, but he didn't go far. He couldn't risk leaving the animal unattended. Still, he noted every detail. If this trap belonged to poachers, there could be more hidden nearby, posing danger not only to wildlife, but to visitors. Tourism in reserves like Umpalozi supported conservation funding, and keeping the land safe was as important as protecting the animals themselves. A rustle of footsteps approached from behind. Ethan turned in time to see Maya jogging toward him, her dark braids swinging against her shoulder. She slowed as she came close enough to see the lion, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock. "Oh no, Ethan, how bad is it?" "Bad enough," he murmured. "The wire dug deep. He must have fought for hours." Ethan pointed toward the trail of blood. "He came from that direction, probably got trapped in the southern sector." Maya crouched. Beside him, her voice low. "We need to call for backup." "Not yet," Ethan replied gently. "If the Pride is nearby, we don't want to draw attention with more vehicles. Let me check him first." The lion let out a faint, pained rumble, and Maya instinctively stepped back. Ethan stayed exactly where he was, grounded and calm. His presence seemed to steady the animal, even if only slightly. He slowly reached for his kit, knowing he would soon need to cut into the wire. But before he could begin, another sound drifted through the valley. Soft at first, then distinct enough to raise the hair on the back of Maya's neck. A low growl rolled out from somewhere beyond the acacia trees. Maya gripped Ethan's arm. "That wasn't him." "No," Ethan agreed, eyes narrowing toward the shadows. "It wasn't." He rose just enough to peer above the tall grass. At first he saw nothing but sunlit brush and distant mounds of earth. But then a shape emerged, muscular, sleek, and golden. A lioness. Her head was low, her stance tense. Her amber eyes were locked directly on Ethan. Maya's breath caught. "We have to move." But Ethan didn't move. He held her back with a steady hand. "Wait." Behind the first lioness, another shape appeared. A second lioness, younger but just as alert, stepped into the open. They didn't charge. They didn't circle. They simply watched, silent, measuring, protective. Their presence confirmed what Ethan feared. The wounded male wasn't alone. He belonged to a pride, and prides fiercely guarded their injured. The lion beside Ethan tried to raise his head toward the females, but didn't have the strength. His body sagged again into the dirt with a soft groan. Something shifted in the lioness's eyes. They weren't just wary anymore. They were worried. Ethan made a slow, deliberate gesture, showing his empty hands before kneeling back beside the injured male. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't want to challenge their instincts. Instead, he let his movements do the talking. Gently, he touched the lion's foreleg, demonstrating the care he intended. The lionesses didn't retreat, but they didn't advance either. They watched, and strangely, the air seemed to soften, tension thinning just enough for Ethan to act. He motioned for Maya to circle to the other side, giving him room to work. She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "Tell me what to do." "Just stay calm," he whispered. "If we panic, they panic." He picked up a pair of wire cutters, small, sturdy, designed for field emergencies. "I need to cut this before it hurts him anymore." Ethan leaned closer, analyzing the cruel pattern of metal coiled around the lion's torso. It was a makeshift trap, the kind poachers used because it required no skill, only cruelty. The wire had wrapped itself beneath the lion's mane, biting into raw flesh. Ethan began with the outermost strand, clamping tightly, twisting, and cutting while trying not to cause more pain. The lion flinched violently. The lionesses growled in unison. Maya stiffened, but Ethan didn't pause. "Easy now. We're helping you. Easy." His voice remained low, steady, the same tone he used on wounded soldiers years ago, reassuring them while life hung in the balance. He cut another piece of wire, then another. Each metallic snap echoed through the valley, feeding the tension, but little by little the lion's breathing eased. Suddenly the lionesses stepped forward a few feet. Maya froze. "Ethan." "I see them," he said softly, continuing his work. "They're not attacking. They're watching what we do." And oddly, they were. It struck Ethan then that this pride wasn't typical. Their behavior was measured, almost intelligent. Perhaps they sensed the lion's weakening pulse. Perhaps they understood suffering far better than people gave them credit for. Whatever the reason, they held their ground, not as predators, but as guardians. When Ethan cut the final embedded strand, the lion collapsed fully into the dirt, free but exhausted. Ethan pressed gauze to the deepest wounds, applying antiseptic cream to prevent infection. He worked quickly, but with reverence, aware that these minutes mattered. The lionesses lowered their heads, not in threat, but in recognition. Ethan felt the moment settle into his bones. One of those rare, fragile instances where trust bridged the impossible. He met Maya's eyes. "We need to step back now. Give him room." They rose slowly, retreating a few steps across the grass. The lion tried lifting himself, but managed only a slight shift, his breath rasping but steady. Then his gaze found Ethan. It held there, weak, unfocused, but unmistakably aware. A look that seemed to etch Ethan's face into the lion's memory, a silent acknowledgement of the hands that freed him. Ethan didn't know yet that this moment would echo far beyond today, but he sensed, deep in the quiet hum of the valley, that something extraordinary had just begun. The morning sun had risen high enough now to cast bright streaks across the valley, illuminating every cut, every stain of dried blood on the lion's battered body. Ethan steadied his breath as he knelt beside the great animal again, gauging the damage with the careful eyes of someone who had spent years treating wounds under pressure. The barbed wire wasn't just wrapped around the lion's torso, it had dug in deep, embedding itself beneath the thick mane and tearing the skin each time the animal tried to move. The cruelty of the trap made Ethan's chest tighten. He had seen the aftermath of illegal snares before, but something about this lion, its quiet endurance, its will to survive, struck him more deeply than usual. Maya watched the scene with a mix of fear and awe. "Ethan, I've never seen a trap this tight. How did he even make it this far?" "He fought," Ethan murmured. "Hard." Reached carefully beneath the lion's shoulder, feeling the wire's tension. "If we don't get this out, he won't last another day." The lion's breath rasped, hot and uneven. Its ribs shuddered each time it tried to inhale. Though its eyes were half closed, Ethan sensed awareness flickering behind them. This creature was still fighting, still refusing to give in. He opened his kit again, pulling out stronger cutters and disinfectant, tools used in both wildlife rescue and emergency medical care. Many of the supplies were donated by international conservation groups and humanitarian organizations committed to protecting endangered animals and supporting safe ecotourism. Ethan silently thanked them as he worked, knowing that without this equipment, the lion's chances would be much slimmer. "Keep an eye on the lionesses," he whispered to Maya. She swallowed hard and nodded, gripping her radio, though she didn't dare speak into it. The two females stood about 20 yards away now, positioned on opposite sides like sentries, their golden coats blended into the grass, but their eyes remained fixed, intense, unblinking, and entirely aware of everything Ethan did. Ethan leaned in, sliding the cutter beneath the first embedded coil. The metal was twisted in a way that made it difficult to reach, forcing him to angle his wrist painfully. When he finally snapped the first wire free, the lion jerked and let out a hoarse, broken sound that tore through the valley. Maya gasped. The lionesses reacted instantly, stepping forward in unison, their muscles taut beneath their sleek frames. Maya stumbled back, but Ethan held his ground, lifting both hands slowly to show he meant no harm. "It's all right," he said softly, though his pulse spiked. "He's hurting because he wants to live." The lionesses hesitated, then stopped. Their tails flicked with unease, but they didn't charge. Instead, they watched Ethan again, closer this time, more intensely, as if deciding whether to trust him. With that fragile piece holding, Ethan bent back to his work. One wire after another snapped beneath the cutters. Each cut revealed deeper wounds beneath, raw, swollen skin, and small patches of fur torn away by the struggle. The lion trembled with each movement, but Ethan kept his touch steady, speaking softly even when the air thickened with tension. "You're going to get through this," he murmured. "Not long now." Maya steadied her breathing, glancing between Ethan's focused hands and the lioness's silent, watchful forms. "I've never seen anything like this," she whispered. "It's like they understand you're helping him." "Maybe they do." Ethan tightened the grip on the cutter. Animals recognize intention more quickly than people sometimes. A low grunt escaped the lion's throat, a sound of pain, yet not aggression. Ethan pressed a clean cloth against the deepest wound to contain the bleeding. The lion shivered beneath the pressure, but he didn't lash out. Something about Ethan's calm presence seemed to hold him steady. A sudden rustling in the bushes snapped Maya's attention. "Movement behind us!" Ethan didn't look up. "What is it?" "Warthogs," she said with a shaky exhale. 3 small ones burst from the brush and bolted across the clearing, fleeing from something unseen. For a moment, Maya feared another predator was approaching, but the bushes stilled again. The tension remained, prickling the back of her neck. Ethan cut the last strand of barbed wire. The tangled mass fell to the dirt with a harsh metallic thud. The lion sagged immediately, his body trembling from the sudden release. Ethan reached for antiseptic, gently spreading it across the torn flesh. The lion winced, but remained still, as though surrendering entirely to Ethan's hands. "Easy, boy," Ethan whispered. "You're free now." The lion's eyes fluttered open wider this time, catching the sunlight. For a brief moment, Ethan felt the animal's gaze lock with his, not wild, not terrified, but weary and strangely aware. As if somewhere beneath pain and exhaustion, the lion understood. Maya approached slowly. "Should we step back now?" "Not yet," Ethan said. "Let him feel the ground beneath him first." The lion tried to lift himself. His limbs trembled violently. He managed only a half rise before collapsing again, kicking up dust. The lionesses growled at the sight, ears pinned back. "They want to help him," Maya whispered in disbelief. Ethan nodded. He had seen animals grieve, animals defend, animals protect. But this felt different. This felt deliberate. This felt like family. The lion gathered his strength once more, pushing up with a strained breath. This time he managed to stand, though unsteady, his legs shaking beneath the weight of his own body. Ethan took a careful step back, then another. The lion watched him, really watched him, with an expression that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. Recognition. Not human recognition, not something sentimental or imagined, but something deeper. A primal acknowledgement shared through the quiet distance between them. The moment held long and still, a fragile bridge between two worlds. Then the lion turned and limped toward the waiting lionesses. They greeted him with gentle nudges and soft huffs, circling him in a protective arc. The 3 figures moved slowly back into the tall grass, leaving only a faint trail where their bodies brushed through. Ethan exhaled the breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Maya looked at him with wide eyes. "Ethan, that was incredible. I've never seen a pride behave like that." "Neither have I," he said quietly. but I think this is only the beginning." And as the grass swallowed the lions from view, Ethan felt the truth settle deep in his chest. This encounter wasn't over. It had only just begun. The valley had grown, strangely quiet after the pride disappeared into the grass, as though the land itself were catching its breath. Ethan remained kneeling for a long moment, his hands still hovering over the remnants of the barbed wire he had removed. The sharp, twisted metal caught the sunlight, its cruel edges gleaming like a reminder of what the lion had endured. But now the danger had passed, at least for the moment. Ethan rose, wiping the sweat from his brow. The adrenaline that had carried him through the rescue slowly faded, replaced by a deep ache of both relief and concern. Maya exhaled shakily beside him. "Ethan, I still can't believe what we just saw. Those lionesses should have torn us apart." "They could have," he admitted, "but they didn't. They watched. They understood something." "You think they understood you were helping him?" Ethan looked toward the tall grass where the pride had disappeared. Maybe more than we realize." His voice trailed off as he studied the ground, retracing the lion's struggle. The earth bore marks of resistance. Deep grooves in the soil where claws had scraped, tufts of fur trapped beneath the wire, and a faint trail of blood leading into the brush. The lion, wounded and exhausted, had still managed to fight his way here. That alone said something about his will to survive. Maya knelt to help Ethan collect the broken coils of barbed wire. "Poachers are getting bold," she muttered. "We need to report this and sweep the southern fence line. If they're setting traps this close to the valley, the entire reserve is at risk." "I know," Ethan said. "This wasn't a snare. It was a choke trap, designed to grip deeper the more the animal fights." He held up a blood-stained coil. "Whoever set this didn't care what they caught. They just wanted something dead." Maya shook her head, anger flickering across her features. "And people still wonder why conservation programs need funding. Without these protections, without the anti-poaching patrols, lions like him wouldn't stand a chance." Ethan didn't respond. His mind lingered on the lion's final look, the weary but lucid gaze that had met his with an intensity he couldn't shake. That moment, brief as it was, felt like a silent acknowledgement. Not gratitude in the human sense, not sentimentality, but something ancient and unspoken. A recognition of kindness in a world that rarely offered any. As they gathered the last of the wire, Ethan spotted drops of fresh blood among the grasses. Not from the earlier trail. This was newer, brighter. The lion had reopened one of his deeper wounds while walking away. "We should follow them," Ethan said quietly. Maya stiffened. "Ethan, that's dangerous. The pride is still close." "I won't get too close. I just want to make sure he didn't collapse." She hesitated, torn between caution and the urgency that burned in Ethan's voice. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but keep your distance." They moved slowly, following the faint direction of crushed grass and scattered blood. The sun climbed higher, warming the air and filling it with the sweet scent of acacia. The wind shifted, carrying distant calls from zebras and the drumming steps of a wildebeest herd on the move. Yet beneath the typical sounds of the reserve, there was something else. An undercurrent of tension, a ripple of unease, as though the land were aware of the injury and watching the outcome. After several minutes, Ethan raised a hand to stop Maya. Ahead, half hidden beneath the shade of a thorn tree, the pride had gathered. Two lionesses, sleek and alert, circled the male gently, nudging him to keep him awake. The injured lion, Zuri, as Ethan had named him, lay on his side, breathing heavily. Each breath lifted his ribcage with effort, his body trembling as exhaustion fought his remaining strength. Ethan felt an ache rise in his chest. "He's fading," Maya whispered. "Not yet," Ethan murmured. "He's holding on." The lionesses noticed Ethan and Maya near the edge of the clearing. Their heads snapped up, eyes narrowing. But they didn't advance this time. They stood guard, not against the rangers, but against anything else that might threaten their wounded male. "It's like they're allowing us to watch," Maya whispered. "Or warning us," Ethan replied. "But either way, they're choosing to stay." Zuri tried to lift his head, but barely managed more than a slight shift of his mane. The bandages Ethan had placed were already stained, but the bleeding seemed slower now. He had stabilized the worst of it, though the lion still needed rest, hydration, and time. Things Ethan could not provide out here without putting the pride and himself at risk. A soft rumble vibrated from Zuri's chest, not a growl, but an acknowledgement. His amber eyes fluttered open, landing on Ethan with surprising clarity. Ethan felt a surreal quiet wash over him as the lion's gaze locked onto his again. There it was. Recognition. Not imagined, not a projection of human emotion, something instinctive, primal, and real. Maya whispered, barely audible, "He knows you?" Ethan didn't answer. He simply took in the moment, a wounded king surrounded by his devoted pride, offering him a final look before choosing to rest again. The larger lioness stepped closer to Zuri, lowering her head and letting out a deep, resonant call that echoed across the clearing. Her tone was protective, commanding, and layered with something Ethan recognized from years of observing lion behavior: loyalty. This wasn't just a pride. This was a family. The scene unfolded with a kind of quiet majesty Ethan rarely witnessed. There were no roars of dominance, no shows of strength, only gentle touches, careful nudges, and a collective resolve to keep Zuri alive. It was the other side of the wild, the side few tourists or documentaries ever captured. The tenderness of predators when caring for their own. After several minutes, Ethan motioned for Maya to step back. "We shouldn't stay too close," he whispered. "If they feel threatened again, things could change fast." Maya nodded and followed him as they retreated through the tall grass. But even as they left the clearing, Ethan turned back one last time. Zuri lifted his head just enough to watch him go. A silent farewell for now. But in Ethan's heart, he felt it unmistakably. This wasn't the end of their encounter, not even close. Something had shifted between man and lion today, something that would echo through the reserve long after the barbed wire was gone. And deep within the savannah, where winds carried stories older than memory, a bond had been forged. The days that followed slipped into a quiet rhythm across the Umpalozi Reserve, but for Ethan Walker, nothing felt as ordinary as before. Every morning he returned to his patrol routes, checking fence lines, monitoring wildlife, logging reports for conservation funding and environmental protection programs. But his mind kept drifting back to the wounded lion. Zuri. The name had come so naturally in that moment, almost as if the lion had already claimed it long before Ethan spoke it aloud. He wondered if the pride had managed to keep him safe, whether the wounds were healing, whether the lionesses continued to guard him with the same fierce devotion they had shown that day. Maya noticed the shift in him. "You're thinking about him again, aren't you?" Ethan didn't deny it. If he survived those first 24 hours, he's stronger than most. "And if he didn't?" she asked gently. Ethan's hands tightened around the steering wheel as they drove through the late afternoon heat. "Then I'll trust that we did what we could." They rode in silence for several minutes, the Land Cruiser bouncing over the uneven dirt road. Dust swirled behind them in a warm golden cloud. Herds of impala grazed on the distant plains, and a group of giraffes stretched their long necks toward the treetops. Despite the beauty around him, Ethan felt a lingering heaviness in his chest. He had saved many animals throughout his time in the reserve, but something about Zuri's look, those tired, aware eyes, had settled into his thoughts in a way he couldn't quite explain. When they reached a high ridge overlooking the valley, Ethan stopped the vehicle to scan the landscape. It was a habit, but today it felt more like searching. The ridge gave a wide view of the savanna below, sunlit grass stretching endlessly, dotted with acacia trees and rocky outcroppings. This vantage point was often used in wildlife monitoring, especially for tracking predators that roamed large territories. Maya lifted her binoculars. "No signs of poachers so far. Good news for once." "Let's hope it stays that way," Ethan murmured. "This area has become a target. With the global push for wildlife products in black markets, poachers are risking more. They don't care how much damage they cause." Maya lowered her binoculars and turned toward him. "But we care, and that makes all the difference." Ethan nodded, appreciating her quiet conviction. Then, as he scanned the rocky horizon again, something shifted, just barely. A flicker of movement near the ridge opposite them. At first, it was nothing more than a shape blending with the stone. Then the silhouette rose, tall and unmistakable. A lion. Ethan's breath caught. Maya leaned forward. "Do you see that?" "I see him," Ethan said softly. The figure stood perfectly still, its mane rippling in the warm wind. The distance was great, but there was no mistaking the broad shoulders, the dark streak near the crown of the mane, the posture that balanced strength with careful observation. "It's him," Ethan whispered. "Zuri." Maya raised her binoculars again. "He's standing, just watching us, and he looks stronger than before." Zuri didn't move. He remained positioned on the highest point of the ridge, eyes trained in their direction. There was no aggression in his stance, no sign of territorial behavior. Instead, it felt deliberate, almost protective, as if he were making sure the two rangers were safe before resuming his watch over the valley. Ethan lowered his own binoculars slowly, a strange warmth spreading through him. "He remembers." Maya smiled faintly. "Looks like you made an impression." But that wasn't the end of it. Over the next few days, the sightings continued, always at a distance, always from a high vantage point. Sometimes Zuri appeared at dawn, a quiet silhouette against the soft light. Sometimes he emerged at dusk, outlined by the fiery glow of the setting sun. And occasionally, he was not alone. One evening, as Ethan finished noting down the migration pattern of wildebeest near the river bend, he felt a familiar prickle run across the back of his neck. He turned slowly. On a rocky ledge above him stood not one lion, but three. Zuri, flanked by the same two lionesses who had guarded him during his injury. The pride. They stood silently, their golden coats catching the fading sunlight, their eyes calm and watchful. It was not a threat. It was not a warning. It was something else, a kind of acknowledgement, almost as if they were showing him the lion had fully rejoined them. Maya reached instinctively for her camera, but Ethan placed a hand over hers. "No," he whispered. "Let them be." They watched the lions for several long moments before the pride turned and disappeared into the grass, their movements blending seamlessly into the landscape. Later that night, back at the ranger station, Ethan sat alone at the outdoor fire pit. Crickets sang in the grass, and the night breeze carried the earthy scent of the reserve. He replayed the images in his mind, the lions watching him from above, calm and united. It stirred, something deep within him, a connection he didn't fully understand. He closed his eyes briefly. "Why me, Zuri?" he murmured under his breath. "Why follow us?" The quiet crackle of the fire didn't answer. But Ethan felt a subtle certainty growing in him. Zuri's behavior wasn't random. The pride's appearances weren't chance. Something was shifting in the wild, something rooted in instinct, memory, and the fragile trust born in the moment of rescue. Before heading inside, Ethan looked toward the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, Zuri and his pride moved through moonlit grasses, watching, listening, guarding. And though Ethan couldn't see them, he felt their presence like a constant shadow. A watchful companion he never asked for, but now could not imagine the reserve without. This bond, whatever it was becoming, was far from over. In fact, it was growing. The dry season crept into Umpalozi like a silent thief, draining the moisture from the soil and leaving the grasses brittle beneath the relentless African sun. By late afternoon, the reserve shimmered with heat, carrying with it the uneasy tension that often preceded disaster. Ethan Walker felt it pressing on his skin as he drove toward the western boundary with Maya beside him. They were responding to a report from a tour guide who had seen smoke rising beyond the hills, never a good sign during this time of year. As they neared the ridge, the smell reached them first. Not the comforting scent of a campfire, but the harsh, acrid sting of burning brush. Ethan slowed the Land Cruiser, eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. A thin ribbon of smoke curled upward into the sky, darkening at its base, evidence of a fresh burn. Wildfires here could start from something as small as a stray spark, but more often they sprang to life after lightning strikes during dry storms. Whatever the cause, they spread fast in conditions like these, threatening both wildlife and visitors. Maya lifted her radio. "Station 1, this is Patrol 3. We've got visible smoke along the western sector. No flames yet, but we're approaching." Static crackled, followed by a clipped voice. "Copy that, Patrol 3. Be advised, an overnight storm passed through that area. Could be a lightning-induced ignition. Proceed with caution." Ethan veered off the main trail, the vehicle bouncing over uneven ground. As they crested the next hill, the source of the smoke became visible. Flames licked through the dry underbrush, pushing forward in jagged lines that devoured everything in their path. It wasn't large yet, but the wind was picking up. Bad timing, bad luck, and dangerous for anyone caught in the wrong place. "Do we know if any tourists were hiking out here today?" Ethan asked. "Two groups," Maya replied, "but only one checked back in. The other was led by a trainee guide, Tom Cawley." Ethan's stomach tightened. Tom was young, careful but inexperienced, especially when things went wrong. The idea of him navigating rising smoke and shifting winds with visitors in tow made Ethan press harder on the accelerator. "Let's find them before this gets worse," he said. As they drove deeper into the valley, the wind changed direction abruptly. Smoke billowed toward them in thick gray waves, rolling low across the grasses. The vehicle's headlights cut through the haze, but visibility dropped sharply. Ethan slowed to a crawl, listening for anything, voices, calls for help, the panicked movement of animals fleeing danger. The fire crackled in the distance, echoing off the rock formations and making it difficult to judge its exact location. Then, faintly, they heard it, someone shouting for help. "There!" Maya pointed toward a cluster of acacia trees. Ethan pulled the vehicle to a stop and jumped out, running toward the sound. The smoke stung his eyes, blurring the shapes ahead. But as he approached, he saw Tom waving frantically, crouched beside three tourists huddled close to the ground. "They can't breathe well," Tom shouted, coughing between words. "The wind shifted too fast." Ethan nodded and reached for his emergency respirator masks, standard equipment for wildfire rescues, often referenced in public safety guidelines and disaster preparedness materials. "Get these on," he instructed, placing them over the tourists' faces. "Maya, help them back to the cruiser." She guided them away while Ethan pulled Tom aside. "Are you hurt?" "No, just scared," Tom admitted, his face pale beneath the soot. "We tried going back the way we came, but—" A sudden roar cut him off. Not an animal, not thunder. A tree trunk, burning from the inside, cracked and collapsed to the ground. Ethan grabbed Tom's shoulder. "We need to move. Now!" The wind surged again, fanning the flames and sending sparks spiraling into the air. Smoke thickened, swallowing the landscape in a suffocating veil. Ethan guided Tom toward the vehicle, but another gust pushed the fire in their direction, igniting a dry patch of grass that flared up instantly. "Go!" Ethan ordered. "Run low!" They sprinted, ducking beneath the rolling smoke. Ethan felt the heat rising behind them, urging them forward. When they finally reached the Land Cruiser, Maya had already loaded the tourists and was shouting for them to get in. But as Ethan grabbed the door handle, a heavy cracking sound echoed through the valley. He turned in time to see a massive burning branch break free from a tree and crash to the ground right in front of him. The impact threw dust and embers into the air. Ethan stumbled back, losing his footing. His ankle twisted sharply beneath him, and he collapsed onto one knee, biting back a cry of pain. Heat washed over him in waves, and smoke poured around the fallen branch like a suffocating curtain. "Ethan!" Maya called from inside the vehicle. "Get in!" "I can't," he managed, shielding his face from the sparks. The branch blocked the direct path, and the fire was spreading too fast. "Get them out of here! Take Tom and the tourists to safety!" Maya's eyes widened in horror. "I'm not leaving you!" "Go!" Ethan's voice cut through the chaos. "Get them clear of the smoke!" Tom reached for the door. "Ethan!" "Now!" Ethan barked. "That's an order!" Maya hesitated for only a second before slamming the door shut. The engine roared, tires spinning as the vehicle pulled away toward cleaner air. Ethan watched them disappear into the haze, his chest tightening, not just from the smoke, but from the knowledge that he was now alone. The fire crackled closer. The heat became unbearable, pressing against him from all sides. Ethan forced himself to crawl toward a slight rise in the ground, desperate to put even a few yards between himself and the advancing flames. Every breath burned, every movement sending pain shooting through his injured ankle. He coughed violently, his vision swimming. The world narrowed to a tunnel of gray and orange. Somewhere in the distance, animals cried out, stampeding away from the fire. Birds burst upward in panicked flocks, their silhouettes vanishing into the smoky sky. Ethan dragged himself another few feet, but his strength faltered. His lungs screamed for clean air. The firelight flickered wildly, reflecting off the sweat and soot on his face. And just when he thought he could no longer breathe, no longer move, no longer fight, a sound pierced the chaos, a deep, thunderous roar that vibrated through the ground itself. Ethan lifted his head weakly. Through the swirling smoke, a massive silhouette emerged, broad-shouldered, powerful, unmistakable. Zuri. The lion he saved. The lion who remembered. And he was not alone. The roar tore through the smoke like a warning from the earth itself, deep, resonant, unmistakably, from a full-grown male lion. Ethan froze where he knelt, his injured ankle throbbing beneath him, his lungs burning from the thick haze. For a split second, fear flickered through him. A lion in a wildfire was dangerous enough. A wounded ranger on the ground was an even easier target. But then the shape moved closer, cutting through the swirling embers with calm, powerful strides. Zuri emerged from the smoke like a myth brought to life. His mane, once golden, now glowed in streaks of ember-lit red, giving him the look of a beast carved from the fire itself. Behind him, 2 lionesses flanked his sides, their bodies low and ready, not to attack, but to clear a path. It defied every rule Ethan had learned about predator behavior. Lions fled fire. They didn't run into it. They didn't approach injured humans. And they certainly didn't risk their own lives to reach someone who didn't belong to their species. But Zuri did. The lion stopped a few paces away, his amber eyes cutting through the smoke with fierce focus. For a moment, neither moved. Ethan felt the eerie stillness settle over the burning valley as though time itself held its breath. Then Zuri let out another roar, not of aggression, but of command. The lionesses responded instantly, circling wide around Ethan, scanning the area with sharp vigilance. "They're protecting me," Ethan whispered, barely believing the words as they left his mouth. Zuri stepped closer, lowering his massive frame until he was between Ethan and the advancing flames. His muscles tensed, his breathing heavy but controlled. The lion's presence felt like a wall of living strength, shielding Ethan from the worst of the heat. It was wild instinct turned toward an impossible purpose. Ethan coughed hard, bracing himself with trembling arms. "Zuri, you shouldn't be here. You'll get hurt." The lion seemed to ignore him. Instead, he moved toward the burning branch blocking Ethan's path. With a deep growl, Zuri lunged, ramming the branch with his shoulder. The impact sent sparks exploding into the air. The branch shifted slightly, not enough to clear a path, but enough to weaken its hold. One of the lionesses joined in, gripping a smaller limb with her teeth and dragging it sideways. The other lioness circled behind Ethan, nudging him gently with her head, as if encouraging him to keep moving, to stay alive. The realization hit Ethan like a wave of heat. They weren't just reacting, they were coordinating, protecting him the way they would protect an injured member of their own pride. He dragged himself forward as much as his injured ankle allowed, inching closer to the narrow gap Zuri and the lionesses had created. The heat baked the ground beneath him, radiating upward in blistering waves. Every breath tasted like ash. But he pushed on, driven by something deeper than instinct. He trusted them. Zuri braced his body against the burning branch once more, forcing it aside with a guttural roar. This time the wood cracked under the pressure, rolling just enough for Ethan to squeeze through the opening. Ethan collapsed onto his elbows, coughing violently. His vision blurred from the smoke, but he felt a sudden surge of cool air as the lioness beside him nudged him toward a cleaner pocket of wind. She stayed at his flank, a living barrier between him and the fire. "Easy. I'm trying," Ethan gasped. The ground shook slightly as Zuri moved to his side, his eyes fixed on Ethan with that same impossible recognition Ethan had seen the day he freed him. A bond forged not by nature, not by survival, but by a single act of mercy, one act that Zuri had not forgotten. Behind them, the flames crackled louder, climbing the trees with frightening speed. The fire was shifting again, driven by a new gust of wind. Ethan knew they had seconds, maybe a minute, before the fire would engulf the area entirely. "Go," Ethan rasped. "Get to safety." But Zuri stayed where he was. And then the lionesses moved with sudden urgency. One at Ethan's side, the other positioning herself behind him. Together they nudged, pushed, guided him down a narrow animal path that cut away from the fire line. Ethan crawled, stumbled, and limped, but the pride stayed with him, bracketing him in a triangle of protection. The smoke thinned slightly as they reached a lower dip in the land where the wind carried cleaner air. Ethan collapsed again, this time from sheer exhaustion. His chest heaved desperately as he fought to catch his breath. The lionesses positioned themselves on either side, scanning the perimeter with twitching ears and sharp eyes. Zuri approached him slowly, lowering his head until his face was level with Ethan's. In that moment, there was no ranger and no lion. There were only two survivors of a brutal world bound by a strange and ancient understanding. Ethan lifted a shaky hand toward the lion's mane, not to touch, but as a gesture. You saved my life," he whispered, voice cracking with the weight of what had just happened. Zuri blinked once, slow and deliberate. Then his massive frame trembled. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as Zuri staggered backward, legs buckling beneath him. The lion had taken in more smoke than Ethan had realized. His sides heaved, and his breaths came out in harsh, ragged bursts. "No, no, stay with me," Ethan pleaded, crawling toward him. "Please, Zuri." Zuri collapsed fully onto his side. The lionesses immediately pressed close to him, their bodies tense with fear and frustration. One nudged his mane, the other released a soft, mournful rumble. Ethan reached Zuri's side, placing a hand gently against the lion's shoulder. The heat of his body radiated beneath Ethan's palm, but the strength was fading. The great king of the ridge, the man who had once stood tall against poachers in pain, now lay gasping beneath the smoke-darkened sky. Ethan bowed his head, tears blurring his vision. "You saved me. Now let me help you," he whispered. But Zuri didn't rise. His breaths continued to weaken. The wildfire roared behind them, but the valley suddenly felt unbearably quiet. The lionesses trembled, torn between staying with their fallen leader and fleeing the approaching danger. Ethan wrapped both arms around Zuri's great mane, pulling himself close as if anchoring them both to the last fragile thread of hope. "You're not dying here," Ethan said through clenched teeth. "Not after everything you've done. Not like this." And in that desperate embrace, man and lion bound in the smoke-choked air, the impossible bond between them reached its deepest point. The king had fallen. But the story was not yet finished. The world around Ethan dimmed into a haze of heat and smoke as he clung to Zuri's mane, refusing to let go. The lion's breaths were shallow, his great chest rising only with effort. Ethan's own lungs burned, but he forced air into them, determined to stay conscious. Behind them, the wildfire crackled, with renewed fury as gusts of wind pushed the flames forward. The lionesses paced anxiously, letting out low, distressed rumbles that vibrated through the ground. Ethan pressed his forehead against Zuri's. "Stay with me, big guy. We're getting out of this." But he knew Zuri couldn't rise on his own, not like this. The fire line was closing in fast, carrying with it a curtain of blazing heat that made the air shimmer. Ethan tried to pull the lion upward, but his injured ankle buckled and he fell back to the ground. Pain shot up his leg, but he gritted his teeth and crawled toward Zuri again. He didn't care about the risk. He didn't care that the flames were nearly upon them. He only knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wouldn't let the lion who saved his life die alone. Then, through the roar of fire, another sound cut sharply through the valley, a chorus of deep, resonant growls rolling in from multiple directions. Ethan lifted his head, squinting through the smoke. More lions. 5 shadows emerged first, then faces, lionesses from Zuri's pride, followed by 2 younger males. Their bodies were taut with urgency, their eyes blazing as they advanced toward the clearing. Ethan felt his heart lurch. He had expected fear. He had expected danger. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. The pride surrounded him, not in aggression, not in warning, but in formation. A circular wall of muscle, fur, and unwavering intent positioned itself around Ethan and the fallen lion. Every lioness stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a protective barrier, facing outward toward the fire as if daring it to come closer. The younger males positioned themselves behind Zuri, nudging his back gently with their heads, trying to coax him upward. "They came for him," Ethan whispered, barely able to speak. "They came for their king." The heat intensified, carrying sparks across the dry earth. Ethan shielded his face, but before he could brace himself for the worst, something astonishing happened. The lionesses began moving, sweeping their bodies low against the ground, swatting burning debris away, clearing a wider path. Their instincts, honed by centuries of surviving the harsh savanna, guided them. They worked together with eerie precision, widening the narrow opening Zuri had created earlier. Then one of the lionesses returned to Ethan's side, nudging his shoulder firmly. Maya had once described lion body language to new rangers. When they want you to move, you'll know. Ethan knew. "You want me to go with you," he whispered. The lioness nudged him again, harder this time. Ethan nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. Okay, I'm coming." But Zuri still lay motionless. The largest lioness, the same one who had stood beside him during the rescue days earlier, stepped forward. She placed her massive paw gently over Zuri's mane and let out a deep, resonant call that sent a shiver through the ground. Another lioness joined her, then another. Together they nudged, pushed, and encouraged the fallen lion. Zuri's eyes flickered open. Ethan gasped. "That's it. Come on, Zuri. Don't give up." The lion's body trembled as he attempted to rise. His legs slid beneath him, but the pride did not retreat. They pressed close, bracing his weight with their bodies, lifting him in the only way lions could, with presence, with proximity, with unyielding loyalty. Slowly, inch by inch, Zuri rose. The sight was nothing short of miraculous. A lion king, lifted not by strength alone, but by the devotion of an entire pride. Ethan felt tears sting his eyes as he watched the impossible unfold. Zuri steadied himself, swaying weakly. His breathing was ragged, but he remained standing. Then he looked at Ethan, eyes dulled by exhaustion, but still glimmering with that same ancient recognition. The largest lioness turned and roared toward the path. The pride responded as one, beginning a slow but coordinated retreat from the fire line, guiding their weakened leader and the injured man through the clearing the lionesses had created. Ethan limped alongside them, leaning on a sturdy branch he had found. The pride parted just enough to allow him into their formation, surrounding him on all sides as though he were one of their own. It was the most surreal procession he had ever witnessed, man and lions moving together in a silent, unified march of survival. The smoke thinned as they reached lower ground where the wind shifted. The heat subsided, and the rising flames faded behind them. Ethan collapsed to one knee, coughing violently. Zuri, too, sank down, his chest heaving, but the air was cooler now, safer. "Ethan!" He heard the distant voice before he saw the figures. Maya and several rangers raced down the slope toward him, relief etched across their faces. They reached him quickly, helping him to his feet as he pointed weakly to the pride still gathered around Zuri. The other rangers froze in shock. Maya covered her mouth. "My God, they're protecting him!" "No," Ethan whispered hoarsely. "They were protecting both of us." The pride didn't flee when the rangers approached. They didn't growl or bare their teeth. They simply stood, a silent circle around their recovering leader. For several long seconds, humans and lions faced one another, not as enemies, not as threats, but as two worlds briefly connected by something unexplainable. Then, in perfect harmony, the pride stepped aside. They allowed the rangers to lift Ethan onto a stretcher. They allowed Zuri to rest without fear of intrusion. And before returning to the deep grasses of the savanna, the largest lioness gave Ethan one final look. Steady, thoughtful, acknowledging. A look that said, "We remember. We will always remember." Zuri recovered over the following weeks under the reserve's careful supervision. Once he was strong enough, he was released back into the east. Wild, where the pride greeted him with triumphant roars that echoed across the valley. Ethan watched from a respectful distance, leaning against his crutch, smiling despite the pain in his ankle. When Zuri reached the ridge, he turned back once, just once, to find Ethan in the crowd of rangers. And in that silent moment of recognition, the bond between them settled into legend. Months passed, but tourists and rangers alike began reporting the same story. Whenever Ethan patrolled the reserve, a lion could often be seen at a distance, standing watch from the hilltops, a golden silhouette against the sky. Zuri, the guardian who remembered kindness, the king who chose to protect a man, and the pride who followed him, rewriting everything the world thought it knew about the boundaries between human and wild. It was, as Ethan told visitors years later, the most unbelievable chapter of his life. And yet every word of it was true. If this story touched your heart even a little, I'd love to hear from you. Just drop a simple 0 or 1 in the comments, anything at all, so I know you're still here with me, sharing these incredible moments between humans and the wild. And if you'd like to hear more true soul-stirring animal stories like this, make sure to subscribe and stay with the channel. There are many more unforgettable journeys waiting for you, and I'd be honored to tell them.